Welcome to study number 19, 1 Samuel chapter 19, verses 1 through 24. And Saul has already committed attempted murder in his attempt to throw a javelin. He wanted to throw it through David and nail him to the wall, literally, in 1 Samuel 8:11. And Saul cast the javelin, for he said, I will smite David even to the wall with it. And David avoided out of his presence twice. So you could say 2 attempted murders. And then we're going to see another one here in chapter 19. So as we begin the chapter, it looks like David just kind of puts this out of his mind as he has gone on since these attempted attempts on his life by Saul, and collected 200 Philistine foreskins as a dowry to marry Saul's other daughter, Michal, who Saul intends to use as a snare in his plan to destroy David. And now we'll see that Saul is going to go all out and not just trying to kill David himself. He's going to put a hit out on David, basically, with his son and his servants. We'll get into all that after we open with prayer. Father, thank you for helping us understand these things, but there's a lot we don't understand. Help us to be humble and to realize that compared to you, we are nothing. Your plan and your understanding is beyond our comprehension, but we know we can trust you. Your word is true. Every prophecy you've ever spoken is coming true. Every promise you've ever made comes true. And so we trust you and just ask for your continued help as we study your word in Jesus' name. Amen. So verse 1 begins in chapter 19, and Saul spake to Jonathan his son and to all his servants that they should kill David. So there's that hit I mentioned Saul's putting out on David. Now, thankfully, Jonathan wasn't a power-hungry madman like his father. Now, Jonathan is exceptional. Through the centuries, you read the Plantagenous kings in England and throughout the history of Rome and others, that it was dog eat dog, and the son of the king would kill everybody. I think it was Henry IV, when he took over, he put an end to those Plantagenous kings in England and killed all the seed royal, as they put it. And we'll see that happen in the Bible more than once. So Jonathan is exceptional. And verse 2 says, But Jonathan, Saul's son, delighted much in David. And Jonathan told David, saying, Saul my father seeketh to kill thee. Now therefore I pray thee, take heed to thyself until the morning, and abide in a secret place, and hide thyself. So Jonathan's going to be wise and careful in dealing with his mentally unstable father. That's one way of putting it. Really, you could say devil oppressed, if not possessed at this point. So he tells David to hide, and he'll have a heart-to-heart talk with his dear old dad. Verse 3, And I will go out and stand beside my father in the field where thou art, and I will commune with my father of thee, and what I see, that I will tell thee. Of course, he's not talking about seeing with his eyes. We say that all the time. Well, let's see. Oh, Dad, can we do this? Well, let's see. And that's the way it's being used there. So Jonathan wants David to see, literally though, with his eyes, them meeting in the field. But David can't be close enough to actually hear the conversation. So Jonathan promises to give David a full report after Saul leaves and gets away from that field where they're going to meet and talk. So the meeting takes place. Verse 4, And Jonathan spake good of David unto Saul his father, and said unto him, Let not the king sin against his servant, against David, because he hath not sinned against thee, and because his works have been to thee word very good. Jonathan's being reasonable, but when dealing with a spiritually dark reprobate, as Saul appears to be at this point, you just never know what you're going to get. Are you going to get Dr. Jekyll or Mr. Hyde. Jonathan continues making his case in support of his best friend here in verse 5. He says, "For he did put his life in his hand and slew the Philistine. And the Lord wrought a great salvation for all Israel. Thou sawest it, and didst rejoice. Wherefore then wilt thou sin against innocent blood to slay David without a cause?" He's saying, I mean, come on, Dad. David killed Goliath, our arch enemy. He's a hero, and you were as happy as anyone when it happened. If you kill this young man, you're going to be killing an innocent man. And on this occasion, at that moment, the evil spirit stays at bay and reason prevails. Verse 6, "And Saul hearkened unto the voice of Jonathan, and Saul sware, As the Lord liveth, he shall not be slain." I don't know about you, but I can almost hear the lack of sincerity. Saul's a liar. He's proven that already, and we'll see it here again shortly. But for the moment, Jonathan believes his father, and so he has good news for David, who's waiting for him out in the field where Saul and Jonathan had been meeting. Verse 7 says, "And Jonathan called David, and Jonathan showed him all those things. And Jonathan brought David to Saul, and he was in his presence as in times past." Now, have you ever had a falling out and the other guy agrees to a truce, but then when you see him, you're just not comfortable around him anymore? I just think that's how David must have felt at this meeting, even though he trusts Jonathan, coming to see Saul. He probably couldn't wait to saddle up and get out of town, which is what we're told in verse 8, right after verse 7. "And there was war again, and David went out and fought with the Philistines and slew them with a great slaughter, and they fled from him." And everybody was happy except for the king. There's little worse in relationships than when you are with an unhappy person that can never be happy. And even when you do things that benefit them, they still are never satisfied, never happy. How many men have been faithful, loving providers, and they tried to go above the call of duty and get nice things and have a peaceful home and show respect and affection, only to end up with a miserable spouse no matter what they try? And in many cases, that unhappy, miserable spouse begins to lie and cheat and steal, and eventually it ends up in adultery. And how many women have been faithful, submissive wives, and they try to go above and beyond, keeping the home, cooking and showing affection, being ready to please their husband with intimacy and attention at a moment's notice, not to mention the kids they might have and all that she does for them, only to end up with a lying, neglective, or even abusive bum for a husband who wastes their money and also ends up into porn and eventually adultery. It's the way this world is for too many people, this fallen world. We're not guaranteed, no matter what our heart is like, doesn't mean that when we get married it's going to turn out well. It turned out very badly for me the first time around. My wife now is a dream come true, and I wouldn't change the last 20 years of my life for anything. But I've been on both sides of that coin, and I've seen it so many times through the years. It's sort of like Peter when he rebuked Simon the sorcerer in Acts 8:23. He said, "For I perceive that thou art in the gall of bitterness and in the bond of iniquity." That's how these people are. That's how Saul seems to be here. And that's probably the most prevalent type of thing Christians go through today that is comparable to what David is going through. Those types of relationships and marriages. Miserable people who aren't right with God cannot be pleased and will remain miserable no matter what you do unless or until they get right with God. Verse 9, "And the evil spirit from the Lord was upon Saul as he sat in his house with his javelin in his hand," and David played with his hand, so this is not good. cue the dramatic, menacing background music. Saul has his murder weapon in his hand, and he's giving way, giving place to that evil spirit that's upon him. We can just picture him glaring at David, or maybe looking down and seeing him out of his peripheral, holding his javelin. And there's David over there just playing gently and trying to be good to his king, and trying to make him feel at home and at ease. And verse 10 says, "And Saul sought to smite David, even to the wall with the javelin. But he slipped away out of Saul's presence, and he smote the javelin into the wall, and David fled and escaped that night." A third narrow escape, and a third attempted murder by Saul. And he isn't going to give up. David got away, but Saul intends on making this David's last night alive. Look at verse 11. "Saul also sent messengers unto David's house to watch him and to slay him in the morning. And Michal let David down through a window, and he went and fled and escaped." Saul's plan with Michal at this point, I'm sorry, I think I skipped a part there where it says, and to slay him in the morning, and it says, "And Michal, David's wife, told him, saying, If thou save not thy life tonight, tomorrow thou shalt be slain." Then verse 12 says, "So Michal let David down through a window, and he went and fled and escaped." So Saul's plan with Michal at this point backfires as she hears through the grapevine what Saul's up to. And so Michal tips David off and then helps him make a secret escape. And how many times have you seen this in shows and movies? You know, Peter Ruckman years ago said that, you know, there's nothing new under the sun, obviously, Ecclesiastes 1:9. And he said that, you know, Hollywood just steals everything. And well, I think he proved it, that all the main plot points, all the main plots originate from the Bible, and they're just a spin off the Bible. And there's nothing wrong with that, except for then Hollywood makes it into something, you know, unsavory, many of the times anyway that they do that. But I think last week we mentioned a Gunsmoke episode that I think the writer had Saul in mind when he wrote it. That Hollywood would be better off if they do more of that, but if they wouldn't make it something unsavory. We'll leave it at that. So verse 13 says, "And Michal took an image and laid it in the bed and put a pillow of goat's hair for his bolster and covered it with a cloth." This is the kind of thing you see in a lot of comedies, actually, but it's not always in a comedy, and I think Shakespeare borrowed this and others. Verse 14, "And when Saul sent messengers to take David, she said, He is sick." Now, we're to assume that these men might have just peeked in on David and saw what they thought was David laying on his bed, but it wasn't David. It was a dummy. Actually, they were the dummies. They were none the wiser. Verse 15, "And Saul sent the messengers again to see David, saying, Bring him up to me in the bed that I may slay him." I mean, you talk about the lowest of the low. I mean, as far as he knows, David's bedridden, sick. Bring him up here so I can kill him. Verse 16, "And when the messengers were come in, behold, there was an image in the bed with a pillow of goat's hair for his bolster." So Saul is going to try to make these men carry a sick man from his sick bed to be murdered, only to find out it was a ruse, and David wasn't in the bed at all. And it's pretty funny stuff, really, on one level. But Saul is deadly serious, and he turns his anger towards his daughter at this point. Verse 17, "And Saul said unto Michal, Why hast thou deceived me so, and sent away mine enemy that he is escaped? And Michal answered Saul, He said unto me, Let me go. Why should I kill thee?" That's pretty wild. I mean, in the text, we're not even told that Michal was told by Saul any of this, that what she knew, what was going on, she knew from the grapevine and maybe from Jonathan. We're not told. But Saul just brazenly, openly admits now that David is his enemy and he wants him killed. He's told Jonathan, he's told his servants. Now he said it right here in front of Michal. He's lost his mind. And that's why a lot of people get caught when it comes to murder or attempted murder and that sort of thing. They lose their mind and they just start being careless, and they blatantly admit things to people and leave evidence everywhere. And that's when you're dealing with somebody. They're not insane in the legal sense, but they've lost their mind in a very moral sense. And sadly, the courts have abused that and let people like the attempted assassin of Ronald Reagan spend his days in a group home, and then they let him free. And it's just really sad to see that, because even though you may be morally insane, but you're not legally insane. If you can think this through and plan a murder like Saul is doing, you're responsible for it. And even if you have, some people get hooked on drugs or drink or whatever, you made the choice to get on drugs and drink, so you're responsible for your actions, even though you may not be in your right mind, quote unquote. So Michal does cover for David by acting like he threatened to kill her if she didn't let him go or help him go where he needed to go. So as far as Saul is concerned, he probably believes Michal and believes she had no choice at that point, so he doesn't retaliate against her, which he may have done if he hadn't been convinced, because he's whacked at this point. And I'm sure David would have approved of what Michal did here. He didn't want Michal to suffer on his behalf. So as we see, Michal starts out well, and actually she ends well. She seems to really have been a very decent, caring woman through most of her life, but most always think of that one very bad moment in her life, and I've been guilty of that myself. Sometimes I forget about the good things about Michal. But when we come to 2 Samuel chapter 6, after Saul dies and David becomes king, and he's bringing the ark up to Jerusalem, and she's very disrespectful and nasty toward David. And it's sad how one bad act can overshadow a lifetime of an otherwise honorable life. But we have to remember that. Satan just wants you to mess up one big time, one good time, to, in the minds of a lot of people, totally undo all the good you might have done up to that point. Don't let him win. But back to our text, we're now told in verse 18, so David fled and escaped and came to Samuel to Ramah and told him all that Saul had done to him. And he and Samuel went and dwelt in Naioth. Now Ramah is identified with the larger name Ramathaim Zophim. It's the birthplace of Samuel. We've talked about it before. And it's deduced from this chapter that Samuel had set up a small college town for the prophets near Ramah. As verse 19 says, and it was told Saul, saying, behold, David is at Naioth in Ramah. And now we're going to see that Naioth is the little, I call it a college town for the prophets because of what we see happening here. The prophets are all there. Verse 20, and Saul sent messengers to take David, and when they saw the company of the prophets prophesying, and Samuel standing as appointed over them, the Spirit of God was upon the messengers of Saul, and they also prophesied. So this wasn't some church service. God overcomes these men, and they're placed into a sort of trance is a word the Bible uses. That's not to be confused with the other use of that word in a more occult sense. But it means they were just put in a kind of stupor, and yet they prophesied. They were overcome in some way and prophesied, and it stops them in their tracks. They can no longer hunt David down, and word gets back to Saul. And verse 21 says, and it was told Saul, and when it was told Saul, he sent other messengers, and they prophesied likewise. And Saul sent messengers again the third time, and they prophesied also. So 3 squadrons of soldiers are sent out to get David and bring him back from Naioth, and probably numbering dozens of men each time, so it may have been into the hundreds at this point. They're all stupefied and overcome, prophesying and remaining incapacitated to some degree. They don't leave, they stay right there and prophesy, so that word then gets back to Saul that your 3 squadrons of men are still in Naioth, and they're just overcome and prophesying, and no one is going after David. So verse 22, then went he also to Ramah, this is Saul, and came to a great well that is in Sikhu. And he asked and said, where are Samuel and David? And one said, behold, they be at Naioth in Ramah. So Saul confirms the accounts that he's been given. He decides to go see this thing for himself. And then verse 23 says, and he went thither to Naioth in Ramah, and the Spirit of God was upon him also. And he went on and prophesied until he came to Naioth in Ramah. So it had to be some sight to see. The king is now overcome as he's traveling. And on his way to Naioth, he's overcome and begins prophesying over the river and through the woods till he reaches Naioth, where you have this gathering of Saul and his men, where all the prophets are. And it gets even wilder with the last verse of the chapter. As the chapter ends, it says, and he stripped off his clothes also. This is Saul. And prophesied before Samuel in like manner, and lay down naked all that day and all that night. Wherefore they say, is Saul also among the prophets? From a human standpoint, this made little sense to the people who were witnesses of everything going on. Is Saul now one of the prophets? What's going on here? And there he is laying naked, basically struck down, stupefied, prophesying naked. It's just, I'm not trying to embarrass anybody, but it's like your pastor, your president, whoever, anybody who's in a position of respect and authority, stripping naked and out of their head, but prophesying. It's just something else. And it's important to get the message, by the way, that God doesn't always make sense to us. I mean, you may say, well, I don't think this makes sense either. What's going on here? Well, it is what it is, as they say. God doesn't need to or have to make sense to us. We need to trust that he is God and we are not, and let him do his thing. He had his purposes in doing this. As I say, I think he was humbling Saul at this point, slowing him down to some great extent. And we can be assured that God has his reasons, and even if it never makes sense to us, God is in control, and Romans 8:28 is always true. And we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are the called according to his purpose. There's a lot going on in this world that doesn't make sense to me. A lot of things through history that just make no sense to me. And I ask myself, I wonder why God allowed that to happen, or what. But I also know I'm going to get an answer. I won't necessarily get it in the here and now. One day we're going to get that answer. And we're reminded of God's words given through the prophet Isaiah, recorded in Isaiah 55, 6 through 9. Seek ye the Lord while he may be found. Call ye upon him while he is near. Let the wicked forsake his way, and the unrighteous man his thoughts. And let him return unto the Lord, and he will have mercy upon him. And to our God, for he will abundantly pardon. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, saith the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. I'll admit there's times where I have to be reminded of that. I have to be put in my place. And I'll tell you, I've known a lot of people who don't get the message and they really think they're smart. And there's a lot of people who reject, like we've seen Kirk Cameron rejecting the doctrine of hell, because in his mind, the idea of annihilation and conditionalism better fits God's character. Well, I don't care what you think. The Bible says hell is real. It is a place of torment and flames, and the punishment is forever, everlasting torment. Who in their right mind would think that they can figure out God? He's God. I mean, what intelligent person could ever think that we could think on God's level? The wise man follows the wisdom of Proverbs 3, 5 through 8. Trust in the Lord with all thine heart, and lean not unto thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths. Be not wise in thine own eyes. Fear the Lord, and depart from evil. It shall be health to thy navel, and marrow to thy bones. So we would all do well to heed this biblical wisdom, but understand that it doesn't mean we do not act wisely as well. We just don't say, well, God's in control, let's just sit back and watch everything unroll. No, we are to act wisely, as David is going to act wisely. We're going to see the next chapter starts, he's getting out of Dodge, or getting out of Nioth, as it were. And that's where we pick up next time, Lord willing, and the church don't rise, and we'll be in 1 Samuel chapter 20 for our 20th study.